past week, I came back on a flight from the very first executive offsite I facilitated in person since the onset of COVID, and had an amazing conversation with an individual, a fellow passenger, who had first introduced himself as the finance guy for a major biotech firm. As I got to know this fellow passenger on the flight home, it was so fascinating to learn how much more richness and life experiences had shaped who he is, and how much more than just the finance guy, or actually indeed the CFO, this individual is. And it's so interesting because when you first meet someone, it's impossible to know their story. We can't inherently know where someone has been, what has truly shaped them. And yet in our culture, whether it's our national culture, certainly within the United States, sometimes organizational culture, or even in our industry, there can be a tendency to rely on someone's title or their qualifications as an indication of who they are. And then we have all the associated assumptions or biases inherent within that when someone says, I'm the finance guy, or I'm the IT professional, or I'm the marketing leader, right? And we think we know what that is, and what they value, and what their view on the world may be. Of course, there's lots of leadership development work that helps us unpack biases and make sure that we're stripping away assumptions. And yet there's a natural human tendency, and culturally sometimes a reinforcement, to rely on titles, not only to define our team members, but frankly also to define ourselves. And yet, in this rapidly changing context around us, not only is this a great time for us to assess what business models and what socioeconomic ways of ordering our world might need to shift, but I would offer that it's also a great time to really think about who we are individually beyond the title, beyond the role that we have had, because those roles are changing so rapidly. There are so many jobs that haven't even been invented yet. By the year 2030, there are some estimates that 65 to 75% of roles that will be jobs out there in 2030 haven't even been invented yet. So if we're anchoring ourselves around a job title or role definition, how much of our own human dimension are we leaving out? This is especially important within teams. In fact, in the recent executive offsite I facilitated, we spent some time identifying, excavating, and sharing our defining moments. You see, we can have mental files on one another, despite the fact that we know cognitively we shouldn't have biases. But it's so easy to slip into, okay, I know, Jim in HR, or I know, Allie over in marketing, and I know who they are, and based on their roles and the repetition of the processes that they have to follow, I know who they are. But do we really? Really rich teams that have authentic exchange of quality dialogue, they have quality relationships, and those quality relationships start with really being able to bring more of your full self to the table, more authentic sharing of what has defined who you are. And so one of the exercises I like to do is something called the defining moments exercise. And a defining moment is a point in your life when you are urged to make a pivotal decision. You're confronted with a change, or you're confronted with sometimes a very challenging or traumatic situation that calls into focus what your values are and how you're going to lead your life going forward. It could be something as traumatic as the loss of a loved one, the discovery of a betrayal. It could be as subtle as some words of wisdom that your grandmother or your grandfather uttered to you at a pivotal moment of change in your childhood. Those moments that are truly, truly defining force us to kind of confront our fears. They challenge us to identify our beliefs, our values, the things that we hold dear, and they compel us to act differently than we have in the past. They're almost turning points in our lives, and we each have them. And you cannot guess what your colleagues in your team's defining moments have been. There are so many incredible discoveries when you open up this exploration with one another. In the recent team offsite, we learned amazing things, acts of heroic nature that were so moving and touching for some of the team members that you never would have known, lives that had been saved, pivotal moments where someone experienced deep sense of profound loss, medical challenges, you wouldn't know these things. And by sharing it, it really enriches our sense of humanity with one another. And it helps us also define for ourselves who we are and what we take a stand for. By entering into this reflection on our defining moments, especially with the amount of change of the last year and a half, we get to define who we are and what we take a stand for. In doing this reflection myself, I thought through a couple of really critical moments, everything from my own personal 2020 and 2012, when I lost everything and I went through a series of betrayals and I lost my life savings and I lost a consulting opportunity, to recent challenges where a number of family members had COVID at the same time that my father went through a major medical crisis. And there were some things that I got clear on that were my core values. One of the things that I do know about myself through reflection on this is that I take a stand for being an example of limitless possibilities. And no matter what life dishes up, I choose to be an example of finding possible ways forward and expanding beyond whatever limits are really given. I also choose not to forfeit my own expansion and growth for the good opinions of others, to not be limited by the opinions of others, but to lead forward with curiosity. What is it for you? What are the defining moments that have been pivotal in your life? Times when moments have slowed down, time has slowed down, and you're not really even aware of the progression of everything around you, and you're forced to decide something about life or yourself. What are those moments? What did you decide about yourself? What do you take a stand for now? We are more than our titles. Our team members are more than their roles, and no label can fully represent the humanity that we bring to our lives and our leadership. Take a pause, dig into these defining moments, and let's be curious about one another's journeys. We can only learn greater richness of what has brought them to this point, greater compassion, greater empathy, greater human conversation, and quality dialogue through the process.